Hello again. Chapter 5 today. Chapter 5 of Emil and the Detectives. Emil has just had a terrible nightmare. He fell asleep on the train and he's just literally woken up. And we will begin now, Chapter 5. The chase begins. Emil woke up just as the train was pulling out of a station and found himself on the floor, feeling very frightened. He must have been asleep, he thought, and slipped off the seat. Now, for some reason, his heart was beating like a sledgehammer. He could not remember where he was at first. Then gradually it all came back to him. Of course, he was in a train going to Berlin, in a compartment with a man in a bowler hat, and he had fallen asleep too. The man in the bowler hat! That brought Emil's wits back. He sat up and rubbed his eyes. The man was gone. Emil slowly got to his feet, feeling quite shaky. Then, from sheer force of habit, he began to brush the dust off his trousers and jacket, and that reminded him of the money. Was it safe? He couldn't bear to feel for it in case it was gone. He leaned against the door, too anxious to raise a finger, just staring at the seat where that man called Gruntheitz had been sitting, and had gone to sleep, and snored. Now Gruntheitz was gone. It was silly to take the worst for granted like this, just because the man had left the train while Emil himself was asleep. Naturally, the passengers would not all be going as far as the Friedrich Street station where he was to get out. Of course not, and he had pinned the money in its envelope securely onto the lining of his jacket, so surely it must be safe. He had only to put his hand into that inner pocket on the right-hand side. His hand went slowly towards it, and he felt about in it, and the pocket was empty. The money had gone. He felt right into the corners of that pocket, and searched frantically through all his other pockets too. He ran his hands over the side of his jacket, but there was nothing there to crackle. The notes were gone. He gave one last frantic rummage round the inner pocket and cried out. The pin was still there and had run into his finger. It stuck in and left a bead of red blood when he pulled it out. He wound his handkerchief round the finger, and a tear trickled down the side of his nose. Not because of the pinprick, of course. He didn't cry for such trifles. Why, a fortnight ago he ran into a lamp-post so hard that he almost knocked it over. He still had the bruise on his forehead, and even that hadn't made him cry. No, it was the money, and because of his mother. You can understand that. It had taken his mother months to save that £7, and to take him to Berlin. He knew all about that. Yet he had fallen asleep as soon as he was in the train, and while he was having that crazy dream, that pig of a man was actually stealing the money. It was enough to make anyone cry. What was to be done about it? Had he got to go on to Berlin and say to his grandmother, "I've come, but I may as well tell you right away that I haven't brought any money, and I'm afraid you'll even have to give me some to buy my return ticket when I go home again"? He couldn't do that. But the money was gone, and Grandma would not get a penny of it. How could he go and stay there after that? But he couldn't go home either. And all because of a low, mean chap who offered you chocolate and then pretended to be asleep so that he could steal your money. It was a terrible thing to have happened. But Emil soon sniffed back the tears and looked about him. He might pull the communication cord and the train would stop and the guard would come along to find out what was wrong. "What's the matter?" he'd ask, and Emil would tell him, "My money's been stolen." But as like as not, the guard would only say, "Well, better take care of it next time." Then he'd be sure to ask Emil's name and address, and "We shall have to write to your mother," he'd say. "Penalty for improper use of communication cord, £5. She'll have to pay up, you know. Now get back into the train quick." Express trains have corridors so that passengers can walk from one end to the other. If Emil had been on one of those, he could have gone along to the guard's van straight away and reported the theft. But his was a slow train. It had no corridor, and there was nothing he could do about it until it stopped at the next station. By that time, the man in the bowler hat might be miles away. Emil had no idea when he had left the train. He began to wonder what the time was and how soon they would reach Berlin. Out of the window he could see blocks of flats and houses with flower gardens, and then a lot of dirty red chimney stacks. Perhaps it was Berlin. He would go and find the guard at the next station and tell him what had happened. Oh, but then of course they would report it to the police. Oh no, the police! If he got mixed up with the police now, Sergeant Jeschke would be bound to hear about it and bring up that matter of the statue. Ah, he'd say, I have my suspicions about that boy, Emil Tischbein. First he defaces a fine statue here in Neustadt with chalks. Then he says he's been robbed of £7 on the way to Berlin. How are we to know that he had ever had £7? In my experience, anyone capable of defacing a monument is quite equal to making up a story like that. He's probably buried the money somewhere or even swallowed it. Don't waste your time looking for a thief. If there ever was one, it was probably Emil Tischbein himself. I advise you to arrest him at once, Inspector. It was horrible. He couldn't even go to the police for help. Emil dragged his suitcase down from the rack and put on his cap. He stuck the pin carefully back in the lapel of his coat and was ready to get out. He had no idea what to do next, but he couldn't bear to stay in that compartment any longer. The train slowed down, and through the window he saw rows and rows of shining rails. There were lots of platforms too, and he saw porters running along beside the carriages, ready to help people with their luggage. Then the train stopped. Out on the platform, the name of the station was written up in large letters: Zoological Gardens. Carriage doors flew open and a lot of people got out. Some had friends waiting for them, and they waved and called to one another. Emil leaned out of the window of his carriage to look for the guard. Then suddenly, a little distance away in the stream of departing passengers, he saw a bowler hat. At once he thought, Mr. Gruntice! Had he not left the train after all, but only skipped out of one compartment and into another while the train stopped and Emil was asleep? Without another thought, Emil was out on the platform. He forgot the flowers on the luggage rack, but just had time to scramble back after them, dashing in and out of the train as quickly as he could. Then, flowers in one hand and suitcase in the other, he scurried off towards the exit. People leaving the train were packed tight near the barrier and could hardly move. In the crush, Emil found he had lost sight of the bowler hat, but he had blundered on, stumbling around people's legs and bumping into them with his suitcase. But he kept doggedly on till he saw it again. But then, all at once, there were 2 bowler hats. The suitcase was so heavy it slowed Emil down terribly. But it might get stolen if he put it down somewhere, so that he could run after the man. He just had to plunge on, and at last came nearly level with the bowler hats. But which one was the right one? One man seemed too short. Emil twisted in and out of the crowd after the other, like a red Indian on the trail, and was just in time to see his man push through the barrier, evidently in a great hurry. Just you wait, you dirty, rotten thief, he thought to himself. I'll catch you yet. He gave up his ticket and changed the suitcase to the other hand, weighed the flowers firmly under his right arm, and ran down the stairs. Now for it, he thought. And that is the end of chapter 5. Chapter 6 is called Keeping Watch on a Tram, and I'll read that ready for you tomorrow. Stay safe, have a nice evening, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.